A charcoal kiln is a furnace built to destroy wood slowly. The process is called pyrolysis. Wood heated in a low-oxygen environment until the volatile compounds burn away. And what remains is carbon, pure and black, and light as air. A fuel that burns hotter and cleaner than the wood it came from. The kilns that produced this transformation on the Cumberland Plateau of eastern Tennessee were built of stone, beehive structures 12 to 15 feet in diameter, with walls 2 feet thick, a low-arched doorway that could be sealed with mud and stone, and a domed ceiling with a vent hole at the top that controlled the oxygen flow. The walls had to be thick because the interior temperature during a burn reached 1200 degrees. Thin walls cracked and collapsed. The dome had to be round because a flat ceiling would buckle under its own weight at those temperatures, and the stone had to be dense. Limestone, sandstone, granite, because dense stone absorbs heat without shattering and releases it slowly. A kiln that holds heat is a kiln that converts wood to charcoal efficiently. And efficiency was the difference between profit and poverty for the men who operated them. The charcoal industry in the Cumberland Plateau collapsed in 1881 when the railroad brought cheap Pennsylvania coal to the ironworks that had been the kiln's primary customers. Within 2 years, every kiln in the district was cold, abandoned by the operators who had built them, left standing in the forest like stone igloos, the doorways open, the vent holes unplugged, the interiors black with carbon residue and silent with the particular silence of a machine that has been switched off and will not be switched on again. The forest grew back around them, vines covered the domes, saplings pushed through the vent holes, and the kilns waited the way stone always waits, patiently, without complaint, for whatever comes next. What came next for the kiln on Hickory Creek was Linnea Whitmore. She was 21 years old in the autumn of 1886, and she had been abandoned by her husband, Colton Whitmore, who left their rented cabin in Hickory Hollow on the 5th of October to buy salt in Crossville and did not come back. He did not come back the next day, or the next week, or the next month. By November, it was clear to Linnea and to everyone else in the hollow that Colton had not gone to buy salt. He had gone to wherever men go when they decide that a wife in a rented cabin and 40 cents in savings are not enough to keep them in one place. Linnea stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. She had thick black hair that she wore in a single braid coiled at the nape of her neck. Dark brown eyes that held steady when she was thinking and softened when she was not. A broad face with a strong jaw. Olive skin that tanned deep brown in the summer and held its color through the winter. And hands that were calloused across the palms from hoeing and washing and wringing and every other motion that frontier life required of a woman's hands on a daily basis. Her mother had been Swedish, Astrid from Dalarna, who came to America at 19 and married a Tennessee farmer at 22 and died of fever when Linnea was 16. Her father followed 2 years later, a fall from a horse, a broken neck, gone before anyone could reach him. Linnea had married Colton 6 months after her father's death. She was 18, he was 23. He said he would take care of her. He said they would build something together. He said a lot of things. 3 years later, he was gone, and Linnea was alone in a way that went deeper than solitude. She was alone in a way that meant no one was coming. No one was responsible for her survival except herself, and the world did not particularly care whether she survived or not. The landlord who owned the cabin was a timberman named Silas Crenshaw. He was 48 years old, widowed 5 years. He owned 6 cabins in the hollow and the surrounding land and the general store in Crossville, and a reputation that made women cross to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. Silas came to collect November's rent on the 3rd of the month. He stood in the doorway of the cabin with his hat in his hands and his eyes moving over Linnea in a way that made her skin crawl. "Colton's not coming back," Silas said. It was not a question. "No," Linnea said. "He's not." Shame. Silas did not sound like he thought it was a shame. A woman alone out here. No family, no means. That's a hard situation. Linnea said nothing. "I've already rented this cabin to the Mercer family," Silas continued. "They're moving in December 1st, but I might be able to make an arrangement. For you." "What kind of arrangement?" Silas smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I need someone to manage my properties. Keep the cabins clean between tenants. Cook for me when I'm in the hollow. Keep me company. He paused. You understand what I'm offering? Linnea understood exactly what he was offering, and something cold and hard settled in her chest. No, she said. The smile disappeared. You don't have a lot of options, Mrs. Whitmore. I have one option you haven't considered, Mr. Crenshaw. I can say no. Silas's face darkened. You'll regret that. A woman alone with no family, no money, no friends. People will talk. They'll say things about you. Things that might not be true but will stick anyway. You understand what I'm saying? I understand perfectly. Good. Silas put his hat back on. You have until the end of November. Then you're out. He left, and Linnea stood in the empty cabin and felt the walls closing in around her. The next morning she walked to Crossville. It took 3 hours each way. She went to the general store and asked about work. The owner looked at her wedding ring and then looked away. We don't have anything, he said. She went to the boarding house and asked about a room. The proprietor looked at her wedding ring and then looked away. We're full, she said. She went to the church and asked to speak with the pastor. He was busy. She could come back next week. She walked home in the dark. 6 hours of walking for nothing. The following week she tried again. Different stores, different boarding houses, same answers, same looks. The wedding ring that should have been protection had become a mark. A woman wearing a wedding ring with no husband in sight. That meant something, and what it meant was trouble. On the last day of October, Linnea walked to Crossville one more time. Not looking for work this time, looking for something else. She went to the pawn shop on the edge of town, the one where men sold things they didn't want their wives to know about. She went inside and looked at the items in the glass case and felt her heart stop. There, on a piece of black velvet, was her mother's wedding ring. The thin gold band that Astrid had worn for 18 years. The ring that Linnea had kept in a wooden box under her bed since her mother died. The ring that had disappeared 3 weeks before Colton left. Linnea had thought she had lost it, misplaced it somehow in the chaos of daily life. She had searched everywhere, torn the cabin apart, wept when she couldn't find it. Colton had taken it. Colton had sold it. Her mother's ring, the only thing she had left of Astrid, and he had traded it for pocket money. Linnea stood in the pawn shop and felt something break inside her, and something else harden. How much for that ring, she asked. The pawnbroker looked at her, looked at the ring. $3. Linnea had 40 cents. I'll be back, she said. She walked home in the rain, and she did not cry. She was done crying, but she made a promise to herself. Someday, when she had $3 of her own, she would come back, and she would bring her mother's ring home. The people of Hickory Hollow had opinions about Linnea Whitmore. They shared these opinions freely, the way people in small communities share everything freely, whether you want them to or not. Thaddeus Holloway, the most prosperous farmer in the Hollow, said it plainly at the general store. He was 55 years old with a gray-streaked black beard and permanently squinted eyes from decades of wood smoke. She should go back to Georgia, or wherever her people are from. There's nothing for her here. His wife, Cordelia, 52 and soft-spoken, said nothing when her husband spoke. But she watched, and she thought her own thoughts. Franklin Mercer, the carpenter who would be moving into Linnea's cabin, examined the situation with professional detachment. A woman alone can't survive a Tennessee winter. It's not opinion, it's mathematics. She needs to find family somewhere, or she'll be dead by February. Martha Brennan, who knew everyone's business and made sure everyone knew she knew, put it more colorfully. Poor thing's lost her mind along with her husband, walking around like she's got a plan when anyone can see she's got nothing. It's sad, really. Tragic. Reverend Josiah Crane, 52 years old with a voice that carried across the valley on Sunday mornings, spoke of Christian charity. We should pray for her, and perhaps take up a collection, but we can't force help on those who won't receive it. And Virgil Tate, 23 years old and full of the casual cruelty that young men mistake for humor, made a bet with his friends at the tavern. $5 says she's gone by Christmas, either run off or dead. No way she makes it through winter. The only person who had anything different to say was old Agatha Morrison. She was 78 years old and remembered things that most people had forgotten. She sat on her porch and watched Linnea walk past and said to no one in particular, "That girl's got something in her eyes. Something I've seen before? She's not running. She's planning. No one paid attention to old Agatha. She was old. She said strange things. And besides, what could a 21-year-old girl with no money and no family possibly be planning? On the 8th of November, 1886, Cordelia Holloway did something she had never done before. She went against her husband. She waited until Thaddeus had left for Crossville. Then she packed a basket with bread and cheese and dried apples and walked to the cabin where Linnea Whitmore was packing her belongings into a canvas sack. Linnea looked up when Cordelia appeared in the doorway. Her face was guarded, ready for judgment, ready for pity, ready for another person to tell her what she already knew, that she was alone and doomed. Cordelia set the basket on the table. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," she said. "I'm here to tell you something my husband doesn't know." Linnea waited. "There's an old charcoal kiln upstream on Hickory Creek, about 2 miles from here. The industry collapsed 5 years ago. The kilns have been empty since. My husband thinks no one could live in one." Cordelia paused. "Prove him wrong." Linnea looked at the older woman, looked at the basket of food, looked at the door through which Cordelia would have to walk back to her own life, her own husband, her own careful silences. "Why?" Linnea asked. Cordelia was quiet for a moment. "Because I was 21 once, and someone helped me when no one else would, and I've been waiting 30 years to return the favor." She left without another word. If you were Linnea, would you dare to live in an abandoned charcoal kiln? Tell us in the comments what you would do. And if this story has already touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Linnea found the kiln at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The November sky was gray. The temperature was 40 degrees. And there, set into the hillside above Hickory Creek, was a beehive dome of gray sandstone, 15 feet in diameter at the base, 10 feet tall at the peak, half buried in the slope with the front face and its arched doorway facing downhill toward the water. Vines covered the dome. The doorway was open, a low arch 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, just large enough for a man to enter crouching with an armload of wood. Linnea's dog, Copper, reached the kiln first. He was a hound mix with fur the color of old pennies. 3 years old and devoted to Linnea in the way that dogs are devoted, completely and without reservation. He had followed her from Georgia when she married Colton. He had stayed when Colton left. Copper sniffed at the doorway. Then he walked inside, and he did not come running back out. Linnea took that as a good sign. She crouched and stepped through the opening, and stood up in darkness that wasn't quite dark. Light filtered through the vent hole at the top of the dome. Dust motes drifted in the pale beam. The interior was a perfect circle 15 feet across. The domed ceiling rose to a point 10 feet above the packed earth floor. The walls were 2 feet of solid sandstone, black with carbon on the interior face, and the air inside was cool and still and smelled of old charcoal. A clean, mineral smell. Not unpleasant, like the smell of rain on hot stone, but it was the temperature that stopped her. Outside, it was 40 degrees. Inside the kiln, it was 55. 15 degrees warmer, with no fire, no heat source, no explanation except the walls themselves. Linnea put her hand on the stone. It was warm, not hot, just warm. The sandstone had been absorbing the weak November sun on the dome's south-facing surface and conducting it slowly inward, storing it in the mass of the stone, radiating it into the circular interior with patient, ancient efficiency. Her mother's voice came back to her then, Astrid sitting by the fire in their cabin in Georgia, teaching Linnea about the old ways, the ways from Sweden, the ways that had kept her family alive through winters that would freeze an American solid. "Stone holds heat the way a heart holds love," Astrid had said, slowly, patiently, for a long, long time. "If you understand stone, you will never be cold." Linnea looked around the dome. She looked at the vent hole that could be adjusted. She looked at the doorway that could be sealed. She looked at the 2-foot walls that had been built to contain 1,200 degrees, and she understood. The kiln had been designed to hold heat. That was its entire purpose, to take fire and keep it, to store thermal energy in tons of dense stone and release it slowly over days. The charcoal burners had used that property to convert wood to carbon. Linnea could use it to survive. Copper was lying in the center of the floor. His tail wagged when she looked at him. He had already decided. This was home. Linnea smiled for the first time in weeks. "All right," she said to the empty kiln. "Let's see what we can do." She met Ezra Boone the next morning. He appeared at the kiln's entrance while she was measuring the doorway with a piece of string. An old man, 58 years old, with a weathered face and hands that had known hard labor and eyes that had seen too much. Copper growled softly, then stopped, then walked over to the old man and sniffed his hand. Whatever he found there, he approved of it. His tail began to wag. "You're the Whitmore girl," Ezra said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Heard you were looking for a place to stay. Didn't expect you to come here." Linnea set down her string. "You know this kiln?" Ezra's face changed. Something dark moved behind his eyes. "I burned charcoal in this kiln for 12 years, from 1867 to 1879. I know every stone in these walls." "Then you know it can hold heat." "I know it can hold heat." Ezra looked at the dome, at the doorway, at the vent hole far above. "I also know this kiln killed my son." Linnea felt the words hit her like stones. "Samuel," Ezra said. His voice was flat now, empty. 16 years old, 1879. We were doing a burn. 3 days in, the vent hole got blocked with debris during a storm. Smoke couldn't escape. The air inside went bad. Samuel went in to check the char and didn't come out." He paused. The silence filled the space between them. "I found him on the floor, right about where your dog is lying now. He looked peaceful, like he was sleeping, but he wasn't sleeping." Linnea didn't know what to say. What could anyone say? "I haven't set foot inside this kiln since that day," Ezra continued. "I live a mile downstream. I walk past here sometimes, but I don't go in. I can't." "I'm sorry," Linnea said. The words felt inadequate. They were inadequate. Ezra looked at her for a long moment. "You're planning to live here?" "Yes. People are saying you're crazy." "I know what people are saying." "Are you?" Linnea thought about the question. Really thought about it. "No," she said finally. "I'm not crazy. I'm just out of options. And I understand something about stone that they don't." "The vent," Ezra said suddenly. "That's what killed Samuel. The blocked vent. If you're going to live here, you need to keep that vent clear. Always, you understand?" "I understand." "And you need a way to adjust it. Open it wide during the day for fresh air. Close it partway at night to hold heat. But never seal it completely. Never." "I was thinking the same thing." Ezra studied her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy something in him. "Your mother was Swedish." "Yes, how did you know?" "Because the Swedes understand stone. The Norwegians too. The people from the cold places." He paused. "My grandmother was Norwegian. She used to say that a good stone wall is like a good memory. It keeps what you give it and gives it back when you need it most." Linnea felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother had said something similar. Different words, same truth. "You should seal the doorway," Ezra said. "Leave a gap for a door. 2 feet wide, 5 feet tall. Cover it with deer hide until you can get glass." "I was thinking the same thing." "I'll bring you some deer hides tomorrow. I got more than I need. And I'll show you where the good clay is for sealing the stones." "Why?" Linnea asked. "Why would you help me?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment. "Because this kiln has been empty for 7 years, and maybe it's time someone filled it with something other than ghosts." He turned and walked away, and Linnea watched him go and felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been hope. The work began the next morning. Linnea gathered stones from the creek bank, flat stones, round stones, stones the size of her fist and stones the size of her head. She carried them up the slope one at a time, 2 at a time, as many as she could manage. Her arms ached, her back screamed, her hands cracked and bled and calloused over and cracked again. Copper watched her work. He couldn't carry stones, but he could keep watch. He sat at the entrance of the kiln and observed the world with the patient attention of a dog who has found his purpose. Ezra came the second day with deer hides over his shoulder. He didn't say much. He just started showing her where to find the best clay, how to mix it with moss to make it bind, how to apply it to the gaps between stones so the seal would hold. "You're not doing this right," he said on the third day. Linnea looked at the wall she was building across the doorway. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing's wrong with the stones, but you're not leaving room for air intake. You need gaps at the base. Small ones, about 2 inches. That's where fresh air will come in when the vent hole is pulling smoke out." "Like a chimney." "Exactly like a chimney. The kiln was designed to control oxygen flow. You're using the same principle, just for a different purpose." Linnea nodded and started repositioning the bottom stones. They worked in silence most of the time. Ezra wasn't much for talking, but when he did speak, Linnea listened, because he understood the kiln in a way that went beyond knowledge. He understood it the way you understand something you've lived inside of, worked inside of, lost someone inside of. By the end of the first week, the doorway wall was complete, a solid barrier of stone and clay with a gap 2 feet wide and 5 feet tall for the entrance. Linnea hung the deer hides over the gap, 2 layers, overlapping to keep out the wind. The vent hole took another 2 days. She couldn't reach it from inside, so Ezra helped her climb onto the dome from the uphill side. Together, they fitted a flat stone over the 10-inch opening. The stone could slide back and forth, adjusting the gap from fully closed to fully open. "During a burn, we closed this almost completely," Ezra said. "Just a crack for the smoke. It kept the temperature high and the oxygen low." "I'll do the same in winter," Linnea said. "Close it down at night to keep the heat in. Open it during the day for ventilation." Ezra looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You really do understand." "My mother taught me." The old man nodded slowly. "Good teachers matter. They matter more than most people know." The skeptics came to see. Thaddeus Holloway was first. He rode up to the kiln on his gray mare one afternoon in mid-November and sat in the saddle looking down at Linnea, who was on her hands and knees applying clay to a gap in the doorway wall. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. Linnea stood up. Clay covered her arms to the elbows. "Mr. Holloway, my wife told me what she did. Told you about this place." Linnea said nothing. "I want you to know that I don't approve. She shouldn't have interfered. This is going to end badly and she shouldn't have given you false hope." "It wasn't false hope, Mr. Holloway. It was information. What I do with it is my own business." Thaddeus's eyes narrowed. "I've lived in this hollow for 43 years. I've seen winters that would make your blood freeze in your veins. Nobody has ever lived in a charcoal kiln. Nobody, because it can't be done. Then I'll be the first. You'll be dead by Christmas. Maybe, but I'll be dead making my own choices, not someone else's." Thaddeus stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head and turned his horse around. "Stubborn fool," he muttered as he rode away. Linnea went back to work. Franklin Mercer came next, the carpenter who would be moving into her old cabin. He was 45 years old with the permanent squint of a man who spent his life measuring things. He walked around the kiln twice, examining the dome, the doorway, the construction of the wall Linnea had built. "Interesting," he said. Linnea waited. "The stonework is decent. Not professional, but decent. You've got good instincts for load bearing." "Thank you, but it won't work." Franklin said this the way he might say that a beam was too short or a joint was weak, as a statement of fact, not opinion. The thermal dynamics don't support habitation. The stone mass is designed to contain heat from an internal fire, not generate it. You'd need to burn continuously to maintain livable temperatures, and the vent configuration won't support continuous combustion without dangerous gas buildup. Linnea looked at him. "Have you ever burned charcoal, Mr. Mercer?" "No." "Then with respect, you don't understand what this structure does. The stone doesn't generate heat. It stores heat. My fire heats the stone. The stone releases heat back into the room for hours after the fire dies. The dome shape circulates the warm air. The vent removes smoke while the base gaps pull in fresh air. It's not theory, it's physics." Franklin's expression didn't change. "We'll see," he said, and walked away. Reverend Josiah Crane came on a Sunday afternoon. He stood at the entrance of the kiln and looked inside with the expression of a man examining something unclean. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "this is unexpected." Linnea was arranging the rush mats she had woven for the floor. "Reverend, a charcoal kiln. This is where you intend to live?" "Yes. These structures were built for industry, For the burning of wood, for the creation of fuel. He paused meaningfully. They are places of fire and transformation, not homes. They're places of transformation, Linnea said. Wood becomes charcoal. Something ordinary becomes something more useful. I don't see anything ungodly in that. The Reverend's face tightened. I'm concerned for your soul, Mrs. Whitmore. A woman living alone in the wilderness, in a structure associated with fire and burning? It invites commentary. I'm sure it does. People will talk. People are already talking, Reverend. They've been talking since my husband left. They'll keep talking whether I live in a cabin or a kiln or a hole in the ground. I can't control what people say. I can only control what I do. Reverend Crane looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head sadly and walked away. Copper watched him go and made a sound that might have been dismissal. Who do you think will be the first to admit Linnea was right? Take a guess in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. The story is about to take a turn that no one in Hickory Hollow saw coming. The conversion of the kiln continued through November. Linnea covered the floor with cedar boughs first, then with the rush mats she wove in the evenings by firelight. The carbon residue on the interior walls she left in place. It was dry, odorless after the first week of airing, and functioned as a natural insulator, adding another barrier between the stone mass and the interior air. She built her fire on a flat hearthstone placed directly on the floor at the center of the circle, beneath the vent hole. The fire was small, 5 to 8 pounds of wood at a time, a fraction of what a conventional cabin required. But the effect was extraordinary. The dome recycled every degree of heat. The warm air rose to the peak, hit the curved ceiling, and rolled back down the walls in a continuous circulation. The stone absorbed the radiant heat from the fire, stored it in 2 feet of mass, and released it back into the room for hours after the flames died. On a typical November evening, Linnea lit the fire at 5 o'clock, fed it until 8, and let it die. She closed the vent to a 1-inch gap, wide enough for ventilation, narrow enough to hold heat, and the dome kept her warm until morning. 8 hours of stored warmth from 3 hours of burning. Maintained by 9 tons of sandstone that had been engineered to hold heat for exactly this purpose. She built a sleeping platform against the east wall, the wall that received the morning sun on its exterior face, the warmest wall by evening, as the stored solar heat conducted through the 2-foot thickness and radiated into the room from behind the bed. The platform was cedar poles and woven rope, raised 6 inches off the floor. Her mother's quilt over a mattress of dried grass, a deerskin on top for extra warmth. She built a shelf into a natural gap in the stonework on the west wall for her provisions. She hung her clothes from pegs driven into the mortar joints. She set her tin cup on the hearthstone and boiled water for tea in the evenings. And she sat in a 15-foot circle of warm stone and firelight and listened to the dome hold the heat above her head and return it to the floor. Copper had his own corner near the door, with a folded blanket and a clear view of the entrance. He took his guard duties seriously. Silas Crenshaw came on the last day of November. He rode up to the kiln at midday with 2 of his hired men behind him. He didn't dismount. He just sat on his horse and looked at the stone dome with its sealed doorway and its vine-covered surface, and his face got darker with every second. "What is this?" he said. Linnea was outside gathering deadfall for firewood. She straightened up and met his eyes. "My home, Mr. Crenshaw." "Your home?" He said it like it was an obscenity. "This is an abandoned kiln on land that belongs to—" "This is an abandoned kiln on public land," a voice said from behind Linnea. She turned. Thaddeus Holloway was walking up the slope from the creek. His face was grim, but his voice was steady. "I checked the county records," Thaddeus continued. "The kilns were built on federal land leased to the charcoal company. When the company folded, the lease reverted. This kiln doesn't belong to you, Crenshaw. It doesn't belong to anyone, which means she has as much right to be here as anyone else." Silas's face went red. "You're defending her?" "You, Holloway. A week ago you were saying she should leave." "I still think she should leave. I think she's going to freeze out here when winter hits hard. But that's her choice to make, not yours." Thaddeus paused. "And I've never much cared for men who try to force women into corners." The 2 men stared at each other. Something old and bitter passed between them. Some history that Linnea didn't know but could feel. Silas looked at Linnea. His eyes were full of something ugly. "You'll regret this," he said. "All of you. When the cold comes and she's begging for help, remember this moment." He turned his horse and rode away. His men followed. Thaddeus watched them go. Then he looked at Linnea. "Don't mistake this for friendship," he said. "I still think you're a fool, but Crenshaw's a bigger fool, and I've been waiting 20 years to tell him so." He walked away without another word. Linnea stood there for a moment, processing what had happened. Then she went back to gathering firewood. Progress was progress. She would take it where she could find it. The first test came on the 15th of December. The temperature dropped to 5 below zero. The wind came from the north, steady and relentless. Every cabin in the hollow burned through firewood at triple the normal rate. Linnea built her fire at 5 o'clock. She fed it with 10 pounds of wood over 3 hours. She closed the vent to a 1-inch gap at 8 o'clock and let the fire die. At midnight, the temperature outside was -5. Inside the kiln, it was 58 degrees. Linnea slept through the night without adding wood. Copper slept curled against her feet. The stone walls held the heat like a promise and released it steadily through the dark hours. In the morning, she stepped outside into a world of frozen white. Her breath crystallized in the air. The creek was rimmed with ice. Every surface sparkled with frost. But inside the dome, it was still warm. Thaddeus Holloway's cabin, half a mile downstream, had dropped to 35 degrees by morning. His wife had slept in her coat. His water bucket had frozen solid, and he had burned through 2 days' worth of firewood in a single night. Martha Brennan, who knew everyone's business, spread the word. "The girl in the kiln says her house never went below 58. 58? With that little fire? It's not possible. She must be lying." But some people wondered, and wondered harder when the next cold snap came and the next, and Linnea Whitmore was always warm. Old Agatha Morrison came to see for herself on Christmas Eve. She walked 2 miles in the cold, moving slowly with her cane, wrapped in so many shawls she looked like a wool-covered boulder. She stopped at the deer-hide door and called out, "Mrs. Whitmore, it's Agatha Morrison. I've come to see your kiln." Linnea pulled back the hide and helped the old woman inside. Agatha stood in the center of the dome and turned in a slow circle. She put her gnarled hand on the curved wall and felt the warmth radiating from the stone. She looked at the vent hole and the sleeping platform and the provision shelf and the small fire burning on the hearthstone. Then she laughed, a rusty sound, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years. "Stone holds heat," she said. "My grandmother knew this. We all used to know it, but we forgot." "I didn't forget," Linnea said. "My mother wouldn't let me." Agatha looked at her with bright, knowing eyes. "Swedish?" "Yes, they remember. The Swedes, the Norwegians, the Finns, the people from the cold places. They never forgot what the rest of us threw away." She accepted a cup of tea and sat on the cedar stool by the fire and stayed for 2 hours, telling stories about the old days, about houses built half underground, about walls stuffed with moss, about survival techniques that modern people called primitive until the modern techniques failed. When she left, she took Linnea's hand in her own. "You're going to be fine," she said. "Better than fine. You're going to be the warmest person in this hollow." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Call me Agatha, and come spring, I'll show you where the best herbs grow. A woman should know her medicines." She walked away into the December twilight, and Linnea watched her go and felt for the first time since Colton left, like she might actually belong somewhere. Ezra came for Christmas dinner. He brought a ham he had smoked himself and a jar of honey from his own bees. Linnea had made cornbread and beans and a dried apple pie that wasn't pretty, but tasted like home. They ate in the warm dome while the world outside turned white with fresh snow. Copper got the ham bone and retreated to his corner to gnaw on it with single-minded devotion. "I haven't celebrated Christmas since Samuel died," Ezra said quietly. Linnea didn't ask for more. She just waited. "He loved Christmas, always wanted a bigger tree than we could fit in the cabin, always wanted to sing carols even though neither of us could carry a tune." Ezra's voice was rough. "After he was gone, I couldn't see the point." "What changed?" The old man looked around the dome, looked at the warm stone walls, looked at the fire crackling on the hearth. "I lost a son in this kiln," he said, And now I've found a daughter in the same place. Maybe that means something. Maybe it doesn't. But for the first time in 7 years, I wanted to celebrate. Linnea reached across the space between them and took his hand. She didn't say anything. Some things don't need words. They sat together in the warm silence of the kiln while the snow fell outside, and the stone held the heat, and the world for a moment felt less cold. January brought harder weather and harder tests. The temperature dropped to -10 for 3 nights running, then -15, then -20. Linnea adjusted her routine. More wood in the evening fire, longer burning time. The vent opened slightly wider during the day to keep the air fresh. The kiln held. 60 degrees when it was -20 outside. 58 when the wind drove the chill factor lower still. But she noticed things. The way old Agatha held her hand to the sky and frowned. The way Ezra looked at the horizon and said nothing. The way Copper paced at night, restless with some knowledge that dogs have and humans have forgotten. "Something's coming," Agatha said when Linnea visited her cabin in late January. "My bones know. My grandmother's bones knew. Big weather. The kind that kills." "When?" "Soon. A week. Maybe 2. The old woman looked at Linnea with serious eyes. "Make sure you have enough food. Enough wood. The kiln will keep you warm, but you still need to eat." Linnea spent the next week preparing. She gathered firewood until her arms couldn't lift anymore. She preserved what food she could. She made sure the drainage channel around the kiln was clear and the vent mechanism was working smoothly. And she waited. The storm has been building. The temperature is about to drop lower than anyone in the hollow has ever seen. What happens next will change everything. If you're not already subscribed, click that button now. You don't want to miss this. The Great White Death came on the 3rd of February, 1887. It began like every winter storm begins. Snow falling steady in the morning, wind picking up by noon, visibility dropping through the afternoon. But this storm didn't stop. By nightfall on the first day, the temperature had dropped to -20 degrees. The wind was gusting to 50 miles per hour. 2 feet of snow had fallen with no sign of letting up. Linnea sealed the kiln tight. She built her fire larger than usual, feeding it steadily until 8 o'clock. She closed the vent to 1/2 an inch, enough for air exchange, tight enough to trap the warmth. She wrapped herself in every blanket she had and lay on the sleeping platform with Copper pressed against her side. The wind howled over the dome, a sound like every demon in hell screaming at once. But the stone walls absorbed the fury. The 2-foot thickness of sandstone turned the chaos outside into a distant rumbling inside. The fire died at midnight. The temperature in the kiln held at 61 degrees. Linnea slept. Day 2 was worse. The temperature dropped to -35. The snow kept falling. The wind kept screaming. Word came through the hollow, passed from person to person in the brief moments when anyone dared to venture outside. Harmon Wallace, a farmer on the far side of the creek, had gone out to check on his livestock. He hadn't come back. His wife had found him frozen solid 30 feet from his own door. 30 feet. That was how fast it could kill you. Linnea didn't go out. She had enough firewood inside the kiln to last a week. She had food. She had water from snow melted over the fire. She had Copper for company and warmth and the kind of silent communication that exists between a person and their dog. She fed the fire. She waited. She listened to the wind and thought about the people in the cabins below. The ones with single walls and drafty windows and fireplaces that couldn't keep up with the cold. Day 3, -40. The air outside was so cold that spit froze before it hit the ground. Metal became brittle. Wood cracked and split. The trees groaned with sounds like gunshots as their frozen sap expanded and exploded. Franklin Mercer's cabin lost its roof. The weight of the snow, combined with the stress of the cold, collapsed the main beam. Franklin, his wife Catherine, and their 3 children barely escaped before the whole structure caved in. They went to the Henderson place. The Hendersons took them in. But now there were 8 people in a cabin built for 4, burning through firewood twice as fast. Day 4, -43. The wind died, but the cold intensified. The sky was clear and blue and completely indifferent to the suffering below. Thaddeus Holloway burned through his emergency wood supply. He started breaking up furniture, chairs, a table his grandfather had built. He fed them to the fire and watched them burn and calculated how many hours of warmth remained. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Day 5, -45. Virgil Tate went outside. He was 23 years old, strong, confident, the kind of young man who believed that bad things happened to other people. He had been stuck in his family's cabin for 4 days with his parents and his 2 younger sisters, and the walls were closing in and he needed air, and he needed space, and surely a few minutes outside wouldn't hurt. He was looking for a calf that had escaped from the barn 2 days before, a valuable animal, worth money, worth risking a few minutes in the cold. He didn't find the calf, but the cold found him. When he wasn't back in an hour, his father started to worry. When he wasn't back in 2 hours, his mother started to cry. When the sun went down and he still hadn't returned, Thaddeus Holloway organized a search party. They found nothing. The wind had erased his tracks. The snow had covered everything. Virgil Tate was somewhere in the frozen white wasteland, and there was no way to know where. Cordelia Holloway held Ruth Tate, Virgil's mother, while she sobbed. "He'll find shelter," Cordelia said. "He's smart. He'll find somewhere to wait out the night." But they both knew the truth. There was no shelter out there. There was only cold and snow and death. Day 6, -47, the coldest temperature ever recorded in Tennessee. The cold was no longer weather. It was a presence, a malevolent force that crept through every crack, seeped through every wall, found every weakness, and exploited it without mercy. In the kiln on Hickory Creek, Linnea Whitmore woke to the sound of copper growling. She sat up. The fire had died hours ago, but the kiln was still warm. 59 degrees. The stone was doing its work. Copper was at the door, his hackles raised, his growl low and continuous. "What is it, boy?" Then she heard it, a pounding on the stone wall outside the deer-hide door. Weak, desperate, human. Linnea pulled back the hide. Silas Crenshaw stood there. His face was white with frost. His hands were curled into claws. Ice crystals clung to his eyebrows, his beard, his eyelashes. And in his arms, barely conscious, was Virgil Tate. "I was checking my property line," Silas managed, his voice a croak. "Half-mile from here. Found him collapsed in a drift. He kept saying, 'The kiln, the kiln.' I knew what he meant. Carried him as far as I could. 200 feet from your door, I fell. Crawled the rest of the way with him on my back." Linnea didn't hesitate. She grabbed Silas's coat and pulled him inside. She grabbed Virgil and dragged him to the fire pit. She built the fire back up, feeding it with quick, practiced motions, while Copper danced around the 2 frozen men, whimpering with distress. She worked on them for an hour, wrapping them in warm blankets, giving them sips of hot water, rubbing their hands and feet to restore circulation. Virgil's fingers were waxy and white, frostbite, severe, but he was breathing. He was alive. Silas sat against the warm stone wall and watched her work and said nothing. When Virgil was stable, Linnea finally turned to look at Silas properly. His fingers were frostbitten too. 3 fingers on his right hand that would never have feeling again. He had walked half a mile through -47-degree weather, found an unconscious man, carried him another half-mile, and crawled the last 200 feet. "Why?" she asked. Silas met her eyes. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. There was only exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "Because I saw him fall," he said, "and I couldn't let him die. Not like that. Not when I could do something. You could have died yourself." "I know." Silas looked at the warm walls of the kiln, at the fire crackling on the hearth, at the structure he had tried to take from her. "You were right about all of it. This place, the heat, everything. You were right and we were wrong, and now—" He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Linnea handed him another cup of hot water. "Rest," she said. "You're safe now." The word spread. Somehow, in the midst of the worst storm anyone had ever seen, the word spread. The girl in the kiln had taken in Silas Crenshaw and Virgil Tate. The kiln was warm. The kiln was safe. On day 7, the Holloway family came. Thaddeus and Cordelia and their 2 daughters. They had run out of firewood. Their cabin had dropped to 30 degrees and was still falling. On day 8, the Mercer family came. Franklin and his wife Catherine and their 3 children, refugees from their collapsed cabin who had been staying with the Hendersons until the Henderson supplies ran out too. On day 9, Reverend Crane came. Martha Brennan and her elderly mother came. Old Agatha came, though she was so weak from the cold that Ezra Boone had to carry her the last 100 yards. 23 people from 7 families. The Holloways, Thaddeus, Cordelia, and their 2 daughters. The Mercers, Franklin, Catherine, and their 3 children. The Tates, Virgil's parents and his 2 younger sisters, plus Virgil himself recovering by the fire. Reverend Crane, Martha Brennan and her elderly mother, old Agatha Morrison, Ezra Boone. The Henderson family, father, mother, and 3 children who had been sheltering the Mercers. And Silas Crenshaw, alone, his frost-bitten hands wrapped in cloth. All of them crowded into a 15-foot stone dome that had been built to burn charcoal. It should have been impossible. It should have been chaos. But the dome had been designed to hold heat efficiently, and efficient design scales. The body heat of 23 people added to the fire's warmth. The stone absorbed it all and radiated it back. The curved ceiling circulated the air and kept it fresh. 61 degrees. With 23 people inside, it rose to 65. Warmer than any cabin in the hollow had been in a week. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the floor. The children huddled together for warmth and comfort. The adults took turns feeding the fire, which burned smaller than it had when Linnea was alone because the human bodies provided their own heat. Copper moved among them like a diplomat, letting the children pet him, lying down next to anyone who looked particularly cold or frightened. Doing the work that dogs do, which is the work of making humans feel less alone. Ezra sat next to Linnea by the fire. He hadn't spoken much since the others arrived, but his presence was steady, solid, like the stone walls themselves. "Thank you," Linnea said quietly. "For what?" "For teaching me about the kiln, for helping me seal it properly. If you hadn't shown me the right way to do it..." Ezra shook his head. "I showed you technique. You had the understanding already. Your mother gave you that." She thought of her mother then, of the lessons Astrid had taught by the fire in Georgia, of the wisdom that had traveled from Sweden across an ocean and through generations to arrive here, in this moment, in these walls. On the morning of day 10, the storm broke. The wind died, the snow stopped, the sun came out, pale and distant but present. The temperature was still -20, but after -47, -20 felt almost warm. The people in the kiln emerged one by one. They stood in the snow and looked at a world transformed. Drifts 15 feet high, trees broken and fallen, the landscape unrecognizable beneath the weight of white. And then they looked at each other, at the faces of neighbors they had known for years, at the eyes that had seen the same nightmare and survived. Thaddeus Holloway was the first to speak. He walked over to Linnea, who was standing by the kiln entrance with Copper at her side. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was haggard. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hands were still shaking from days of cold that wouldn't quite leave his bones. "I was wrong," he said. His voice cracked. "I said you'd be dead by Christmas. I said no one could live in a charcoal kiln. I called you a fool and a stubborn girl who didn't know what she was doing." He paused, swallowed hard. "I was wrong about all of it. You built the only thing in this hollow that could save us. And you let us in even though we didn't deserve it. Even though we..." He couldn't continue. The words stuck in his throat. Linnea reached out and took his hand. "You helped me when Silas tried to take this place away. You stood up for me when you didn't have to. We're even." Thaddeus shook his head. "We're not even. We'll never be even. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Franklin Mercer stepped forward. The carpenter who had said the thermal dynamics were impossible. "I measured everything," he said. "I calculated the heat loss and the airflow and the efficiency ratings. I told you it couldn't work." He paused. "I was wrong. The numbers I was using were wrong. The assumptions I was making were wrong. You understood something I didn't, and it saved my family's lives." Reverend Crane was next. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there with his Bible in his hands and his eyes on the stone dome that he had called a place of fire and transformation. "I believe," he said finally, that God works in mysterious ways. I also believe that I have been a fool, and I ask your forgiveness for the things I said and the things I thought and the judgment I passed on you without understanding. One by one they came, the skeptics and the critics and the gossips and the doubters. One by one, they acknowledged what they had said and what they had believed and how wrong they had been. Linnea listened to all of it. She accepted the apologies and the thanks and the offers of help and repayment. She was gracious because that was her nature. She was forgiving because there had been enough hardness in her life already. But when Silas Crenshaw approached, something different passed between them. He stood before her with his frost-bitten hands and his haunted eyes and the weight of everything he had done pressing down on his shoulders. I tried to take this from you, he said. I tried to force you into a corner. I wanted things I had no right to want. And when you refused, I wanted you to fail. I wanted to watch you fail so I could tell myself I was right. He stopped, looked at the ground, looked at his damaged hands. You saved my life, he said. You saved Virgil's life. You saved everyone here. And you did it with the thing I tried to steal from you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. This is a deed, he said. 40 acres, the land around this kiln and down to the creek. It's yours, legally, permanently. No one can ever take it from you again. Linnea stared at the paper. I don't understand. Call it restitution. Call it penance. Call it whatever you want. I'm giving you what I tried to take, and I'm hoping that someday you might be able to forgive me. Linnea took the paper. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Silas. Forgiveness takes time, she said. But this is a start. Silas nodded, turned, walked away. And Linnea watched him go and felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been tight for months. Something that was finally beginning to loosen. This is the part of the story where everything changes. If you've made it this far, you understand why Linnea's story matters. Take a moment to share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're almost at the end, but the most important part is still to come. The aftermath took months to understand. 67 people died in the Great White Death of 1887, spread across 4 counties, frozen in their homes, frozen in their barns, frozen on the roads trying to reach shelter that didn't exist. In Hickory Hollow, no one died, the only settlement in the region that lost no one, because of a 21-year-old woman and a stone dome that everyone had said couldn't work. The news spread, first through the county, then through the state, then beyond. Researchers came from the University of Tennessee. They measured the kiln. They calculated the thermal mass. They documented the vent system and the air circulation and the efficiency of the design. They published papers with titles that Linnea couldn't understand and conclusions that she had known all along. The kiln was 2.4 times more efficient than a conventional cabin of the same size. The stone walls stored heat at a rate that modern engineers would later recognize as optimal for passive solar design. The dome shape created natural convection currents that distributed warmth evenly throughout the space. Science had caught up with knowledge that Astrid from Dalarna had known since childhood. The spring of 1887 brought building. 5 families in the hollow began converting abandoned kilns into homes or storage buildings or livestock shelters. They came to Linnea for advice. She gave it freely. Clear the south face for solar gain. Keep the north face covered. Seal the gaps with clay and moss. Leave air intake at the base. Make the vent adjustable. She taught them what her mother had taught her, and what Ezra had taught her, and what the kiln itself had taught her through months of living and adjusting and learning. Thaddeus Holloway converted a smaller kiln on his property into a root cellar. The constant temperature kept his vegetables fresh through the summer and preserved them through the winter. He credited Linnea publicly and loudly and often. Franklin Mercer studied the thermal dynamics until he understood them properly. He began incorporating thermal mass principles into his carpentry. Stone foundations, thick walls, fewer windows on the north face. His buildings were warmer and used less fuel, and his business grew. Even Reverend Crane found a way to incorporate the lesson into his sermons. The wisdom of the ages, he called it, the knowledge that our ancestors possessed and that we, in our arrogance, forgot. God preserved that knowledge through the hands of a young woman who had nothing else to rely upon. And through her, he reminded us that there is more to learn from the past than we remember. Linnea sat in the back pew when he preached that sermon. Copper lay at her feet. Ezra sat beside her. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged to a community that wanted her there. In the spring of 1888, Linnea walked to Crossville with $3 in her pocket. She had earned every cent of it herself, mending clothes and leather goods for the families in the hollow. Selling eggs from the chickens she now kept in a stone pen against the kiln's north face, trading her skills for money, one stitch at a time. She went to the pawn shop on the edge of town. The thin gold band was still there, sitting on the same piece of black velvet where she had seen it 2 years before. "I'll take the ring," she said. The pawnbroker looked at her, looked at the money, looked at the ring. "That's been here a long time," he said. "Nobody wanted it. I wanted it. I just couldn't afford it." She slid the ring onto her finger. Her mother's ring, the last piece of Astrid that existed in the world. It fit perfectly. She walked home with the gold warm against her skin, and she wore it every day for the rest of her life. The years passed, with seasons and changes and the slow accumulation of days that becomes a life. Linnea's mending business grew into a leather-working trade. She repaired harnesses and saddles and boots. She made belts and bags and gun holsters. Her stitches were tight and her prices were fair, and her reputation spread as far as Crossville and beyond. She bought an iron cook stove with her earnings, and glass for the door frame to replace the deer hides, and new fabric for curtains, and a dress, the first new dress she had owned since her wedding. She built a lean-to against the kiln's south face, a roofed workspace for warm weather work. She built a chicken pen against the north face, using the kiln wall as one side of the enclosure. The heat radiating through the 2-foot stone kept the hens laying through winter when every other flock in the hollow had stopped. Small improvements, steady progress, a life assembled piece by piece from the wreckage of abandonment. Ezra came for dinner every Sunday. He brought fish from the creek, or game from the forest, or honey from his bees. He sat by the fire and told stories about the old days and listened, while Linnea told stories about her mother and the knowledge that had been passed down through generations of cold country people. "She'd be proud of you," Ezra said one evening. "Your mother." "I hope so. I know so. A parent's hope for their child is that the child will survive and thrive and make something of themselves. You've done all three. She'd be proud." Linnea looked at the man who had lost his son in this very kiln, the man who had found a daughter in the same place, the man who had taught her what she needed to know and supported her when no one else would. "You'd have been proud of Samuel too," she said, "whatever he became." Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I like to think so. I like to think he would have been something special. He was something special. He was your son. That made him special." The old man's eyes glistened in the firelight, but he didn't cry. He just smiled and reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a reason to come back to this place." Ezra died in the spring of 1892, quietly in his sleep, in the cabin downstream from the kiln. Linnea found him the next morning when he didn't come for their Sunday dinner. He was 64 years old. He had outlived his wife by 30 years and his son by 13. He had spent the last 6 years of his life watching a young woman transform the place of his greatest grief into something beautiful. His will was simple. Everything he owned went to Linnea. The cabin, the land, the bees, all of it. Linnea buried him on the hillside above the kiln, where he could see the stone dome that had defined his life in both its tragedy and its redemption. She visited his grave every Sunday. She told him about the weather and the chickens and the leather orders. She told him about the families who were still using kiln conversion techniques. She told him about the researchers who came occasionally to study and document. And she thanked him every week for seeing something in her when no one else did. Copper died in the winter of 1894. He was 11 years old, ancient for a dog his size. His muzzle had gone gray years before. His eyes had clouded. His legs had stiffened until walking became difficult and then impossible. On his last night, Linnea carried him to the sleeping platform and lay beside him, with her hand on his chest. She felt his heartbeat slow. She felt his breathing ease. She felt the moment when his spirit left and his body became still. She buried him beside Ezra. She carved a simple marker from cedar wood, copper, faithful friend through the coldest days. The kiln felt emptier after that, quieter. The particular silence of a space that used to hold something living and no longer does. But Linnea kept the blanket in Copper's corner. She kept his bowl by the door. And sometimes in the evening firelight, she could almost see him there, watching, waiting, guarding her the way he had guarded her for 11 years. Linnea lived in the kiln for 9 years. She left in 1895, not because the kiln had failed her, it never failed her, but because the leather business had grown beyond what she could manage alone. She needed a proper workshop, a storefront, space to take on apprentices. She moved to Crossville. She opened a shop. She became the most respected leather worker in 3 counties. But she never sold the kiln. She kept the 40 acres that Silas had given her. She maintained the dome. She sealed it and cleaned it and preserved it the way you preserve something sacred. Because it was sacred. It was the place where she had survived when everyone said she would die. The place where she had proven herself when everyone said she would fail. The place where she had built a life from nothing but stone and heat and the knowledge her mother had given her. She never married again. Not because no one asked. Plenty asked. Good men, kind men. Men who would have been proud to call Linnea Whitmore their wife. But Linnea had learned something in those 9 years in the kiln. She had learned that she didn't need someone else to survive. She didn't need someone else to be complete. She was enough on her own. And that knowledge, that hard-won, blood and tears earned knowledge, was worth more than any marriage could have given her. In 1923, researchers from the University of Tennessee published a comprehensive study of the kiln-dwelling phenomenon in the Cumberland Plateau. They documented 7 homes that had been created from abandoned charcoal kilns following the Great White Death of 1887. They measured temperatures and efficiency ratings and fuel consumption. They interviewed the families who had built them and the descendants who still maintained them. And they traced it all back to Linnea Whitmore, the woman who had been abandoned by her husband, rejected by her community, written off as crazy and stubborn and doomed. The woman who had looked at a structure built for destruction and seen the possibility of shelter, who had applied knowledge passed down through generations of cold country survivors, who had created something that saved lives and changed how an entire community thought about building. The study was published in an academic journal that Linnea never read, but word reached her through a letter from Cordelia Holloway's granddaughter, Helena. "They're calling you a pioneer," the letter said, "an innovator. They're saying you revolutionized regional architecture." Linnea laughed when she read it. She wrote back, "I didn't revolutionize anything. I just remembered what my mother taught me." But Helena wrote again, "That's exactly what they mean. You remembered when everyone else forgot, and that made all the difference." Cordelia Holloway passed away in 1921 at the age of 87. She had been one of Linnea's closest friends for 35 years, the woman who had pointed a desperate girl toward an abandoned kiln and changed everything. Before she died, Cordelia wrote a letter. She gave it to her granddaughter Helena with instructions to read it at Linnea's funeral whenever that day came. "I knew she would do something extraordinary," the letter said. "I could see it in her eyes. The determination, the intelligence, the absolute refusal to give up. I just pointed her in the right direction. She did all the rest herself." Linnea Whitmore died in 1937. She was 72 years old. She died in her bed in Crossville, surrounded by the apprentices who had become like children to her. The leather shop she had built passed to them. The business she had created lived on in their hands. But she asked to be buried on the hillside above the kiln, beside Ezra, beside Copper, in the place where everything had begun. The funeral was attended by over 200 people, farmers and merchants and craftspeople, descendants of the families who had sheltered in the kiln during the Great White Death, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the skeptics who had mocked her and the believers who had supported her. Helena Holloway, Cordelia's granddaughter, stood at the graveside and read her grandmother's letter aloud. The words carried across the hillside and down to the stone dome and out over Hickory Creek. "I knew she would do something extraordinary. I could see it in her eyes." The minister spoke of faith and perseverance. He spoke of the widow's oil that never ran out and the bread that fed thousands. He compared Linnea's story to the parables and the Psalms, but Linnea would have said it was simpler than that. Stone holds heat the way a heart holds love, slowly, patiently, for a long, long time. If you understand stone, you will never be cold. Her mother's words, her mother's wisdom, her mother's gift, passed down through generations of women who knew how to survive, and passed on to everyone Linnea ever taught. The kiln still stands. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1967, preserved by the Tennessee Historical Society as an example of adaptive architecture and frontier innovation. The stone dome rises from the hillside above Hickory Creek exactly as it did in 1886. The sealed doorway, the adjustable vent, the 2-foot walls that hold heat like a promise and release it like a secret. A brass plaque near the entrance tells the story. It speaks of Linnea Whitmore and the Great White Death and the 23 lives saved in a 15-foot circle of stone. It speaks of thermal mass and passive heating and the wisdom of ancestral knowledge. But the plaque doesn't capture everything. It doesn't capture the sound of the wind howling over the dome while the interior stays quiet. It doesn't capture the feeling of warm stone under cold fingers. It doesn't capture the sight of firelight dancing on curved walls, or the smell of cedar smoke rising toward a circular vent, or the particular piece of a space designed to hold heat and holding it perfectly. It doesn't capture what it meant to a 21-year-old woman who had lost everything: her parents, her husband, her home, her community's respect, to find a place where she could survive. Not just survive, thrive. And it doesn't capture the thousands of people over the years who have walked through that low doorway and stood up inside the dome and felt the temperature difference and understood, finally, what Linnea understood on that November afternoon in 1886. That the things we throw away are not always useless. That the knowledge we forget is not always obsolete. That the people we dismiss and underestimate and write off might be exactly the ones who save us when everything else fails. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever proven the doubters wrong? We want to hear your story, because stories like Linnea's are everywhere, in every family, in every community, in every generation. Stories of people who faced impossible odds and found a way through. Stories of wisdom passed down and knowledge preserved and survival against all expectations. The fire is warm, the night is still, and the stone holds the heat. Until next time. The end.